Tes Adar, 81 years ago, is the day that the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, came to America. I heard a description from Shmuel Isaac Popak, who was there when the Rebbe arrived. He was a bocher. And he tries to describe how he experienced the Rebbe's coming. So the expression that he uses is, the Rebbe came off the boat, quote, shooting on all cylinders. That's the expression that he used. The Rebbe came off the boat shooting on all cylinders. Meaning to say, the Rebbe didn't give himself a moment to rest. The Rebbe came here, and Toich Kedei Dibur, as soon as the Rebbe arrived, he began to do work for spreading Yiddishkeit in America. Shooting on all cylinders. It's a military expression. If you have many, many guns, you use all the guns at the same time. But Gashmias, the Rebbe was extraordinarily limited. The Rebbe Rayatz Kvayochel, even B'didiv Agbola, his walking and his speech, but his clarity of purpose. You know, Lama Zeh Anoichi. There was no doubt about the Lama Zeh Anoichi, you know. He didn't have those problems. He had a very clear sense Mipnei Ma Yorda Neshama Lamata, what he needed to do. And of course, I want to say two things. The Rebbe came here with the attitude of making America a Mokum Teda like in the Alter Heim. He wanted the Yiddishkeit in America to be like it was in the old country. But there's a kamos and there's an echos. There's a quantity and there's a quality. The quantity is that there simply should be places for Yiddish kids to go to learn. There should be Talmudei Teda, there should be yeshivas, there should be Batei Sefer, there should be whatever is necessary for chinuch in America. And it shouldn't be, you know, that one child out of 1,000 goes to a cheder, the other 999 go to public school, Rachmana litzlan, and then they get after school instruction in a Talmud Teda, whether it's Sunday or it's every day or whatever the particulars are. But then there's an echos, and the echos is very, very important. One, I want to say 2 points about the echos of the Rebbe coming to America, the Frierdiker Rebbe coming to America. One aspect of the echos, which was a big deal, and it's something that we know from our own experience even though we're not 80 years old, that in America things should be lechatchila, not b'di'evet. There was a shita, there was an attitude that in America everything has to be American. And when it comes to inyanim that have to do with America, and there's many aspects in that, one of them has to look nice, has to be showy. And another aspect that has to be, you have to be like everybody else, niyeh kagoyim, davoizem v'degoyim. That's a lechatchila, that must be precise, that must be exact. A mitzvah, a hider mitzvah, this, if there's a heter, if there's a kula, if there's a b'di'evet, that becomes the American lechatchila. And the Rebbe wanted, the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted, and the Rebbe wanted that everything in America should be lechatchila, sheba lechatchila. For example, Chol of Yisrael. You want to go into Hatedim, Rachmana litzlan for Chol of Stam, go into Hatedim. But we're not looking for Hatedim, we're looking for lechatchila, Chol of Yisrael, and Pas Yisrael, and Bishul Yisrael, and a Shetel, and a board. Everything should be in an oifen of lechatchila. And then there's another aspect of the echos. And the second aspect of the echos is that in the minds of Yidden, our mentality, our ashkafas oilam should be in the Alter Heim. Meaning to say, in the old country, you were first a Jew and then a Russian. You were first a Chassid and then you were a Pole. Whatever your life was, your identity was Yiddishkeit. Your mohus was that you're a Yid. And then you lived in the world. This aspect is so important. It's so basic, it's so deep to the Rebbe's Kavanah in coming to this country, that when a Yid thinks about himself, what is he as a Chassid? This is a chinuch, right? This is what the Rebbe wanted. Came to this country, which means everything has to be lechatchila in terms of Yiddish Shamayim. And perhaps ikikol iknim, we should be our mentality should be a Yiddish Chassidish mentality, not an American mentality. It should be Yiddish Chassidish lechatchila azevi in the Alter Heim. This was the dream of the Rebbe Rayatz. And of course, the Rebbe's attitude was, like it says, "Tak in the Yem Teva Pula Achas Me'elef Anochas." There's a lot of challenges. The opposition is formidable. To see the light at the end of the tunnel, you have to be a great prophet. Not a great wise man, a great prophet. But one thing is certain, if you don't do anything, nothing's going to happen. And if you do something, there's a distinct possibility that something will happen. And that was the shtel. That was the shtel. That was the attitude. That was the hashkafa. That was the philosophy. And that's what the Rebbe did. He came to this country, the Rebbe did, Friedrich Rebbe did, and he immediately started to do pu'ulis shalei lefiyerach kechoisov, shalei lefiyerach ma'oidoi, shalei lefiyerach nafshei, shalei lefiyerach ruchei, shalei lefiyerach gufei. He did. And he worked. And then, of course, a year and 3 months later, the Rebbe Zolgazunz and our Rebbe came and joined him. And this is our life. This is our entire identity, is this story of Tes Adar. The Rebbe comes to the United States of America. And of course, the story to the story is that the night that the Rebbe arrived, so 3 years later, Tafshin Beis, Tafshin Gimel, there was a dinner for Temchat Mimim on Tes Adar, on the anniversary of his arrival. They made a dinner for the yeshiva. And the Friedrich Rebbe came to the dinner. And at the dinner he spoke. He spoke Divrei Psicha, Divrei Chsima. The Friedrich Rebbe spoke at the dinner. And part of what he said was, I want to read to you excerpts from my diary from 3 years ago today, the day I arrived in America. And he continued to say that when I came here, so there was a big COVID. There was a big COVID in the shipyard and the dock. The mayor sent a representative, and the other Jewish organizations sent people to honor me when I arrived. Baruch haba. Then I went to the Greystone Hotel, and there was weiter people there to see me. And then all the noise subsided, and all the tumult ended, and all the covet givers left, and I was left with the Gute Freund. So the Rebbe says, that night, and it's me and I say Gute Freund. 2 people were my friends. They were on my team, meine Chevre, meine Menschen. And they said to me, said to the Rebbe, we're sharing this with you because we love you, and we don't want you to suffer achzava. We don't want you to suffer disappointment. So we want you to know that America is an eretz eicheles yishveha. America eats everybody up. This country is a meat grinder. You come here, you become a part of what is here. And what is here is a different hashkafa selah. It's a different cook. It's a whole different thinking, a thought process of what life is and how life is lived. What's an ikir and what's a tafel, what's important and what's secondary, what's first and what's second. And the Rebbe told the Rebbe, what you talked about today will not happen in America. It cannot happen in America. America will not tolerate that kind of Yid and that kind of Yiddishkeit. And America had big academies, And in these academies, they had big scholars. And some of them knew Kol HaShas, big Talmidei Chachamim. But it was all Nusach America. And the nusach of America is that knowledge is academic, it's scholarship, it's yeda, it makes me a muhus, that I'm an intellectual. But the yid, the amolike yid, the ehrliche yid from Amol, where what he learned and what he did were one and the same. And that his life is serving Hashem. And there's no other considerations. This doesn't go in America. So the Rebbe says, he read this from his diary, and he says, Stell sich vor, was heise tren, ich hab vergossen jenem Nacht, bei Krishma Shalomit. Just try to imagine what kind of boiling tears I spilled that night when I said Krishma, if this is what my friends are telling me. So the Rebbe says, now it's 3 years later, and we're making a dinner for Yeshivas Temchat Mimim. It was the middle of the war still. And you see that they were wrong and I was right. You see that the possibility of making America do what Europe was is real. It can be done. The Rebbe Rayatz, the Friedrich Rebbe, in contrast to our Rebbe, was very artful, very artistic in his descriptions. The Rebbe Zolgazunzain was very, I don't know what the word is, intellectual. But the Friedrich Rebbe used to use expressions of chush, of tzir, of a visual, of imagination. So in the various sichos, I once collected them. I think I have them online. I have on my website I have classes on Mashiach. And one of my classes on Mashiach are the Friedrich Rebbe's Siches when he came to America. And you see different quotes from different years, from 43 and from 45 and from 47 and 48. I tried to collect, I read those Siches. Then I tried to remember where I saw them and to compile them. But he'll use such expressions. America is a kerach haneda. It's a frost. It's ice, solid ice. And of course, one of the first campaigns that Rebbe made when he came here was that people should say, walking the street and say Mishnayos Baal Peh. In the belief that when we say Mishnayos Baal Peh, we're tired as ha'avir, we purify the ear. The Rebbe used to say, the Amerikaner avir is shtikedik. The American air is suffocating. It's very difficult to breathe. And of course, he meant spiritually. And the Medyanin gas, sitzen in subway, they stehen in store. The Friedrich Rebbe used to use more English words than the Rebbe did. It's so interesting. When we say Mishnayos Baal Peh, and we'll say the Mishnayos Baal Peh will be Metal the Avir. And the Rebbe, of course, organized the Chevre Mishnayos Baal Peh, and the Friedrich Rebbe himself participated. And if you wanted to be a member of the Chevre Mishnayos, you would send in your name to the Machane Yisrael. And every year, Erev Reish Chodesh Sivan, I don't know for how many years, but for a few years, there was a goydel, a lottery, and they would divide up the shas based on the number of participants. And it looks from the numbers that there were several hundred people who participated, and everyone got 2 or 3 mishnayos. And there's actually a letter from the Friedrich Rebbe to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was downstairs, the Friedrich Rebbe was upstairs, but he wrote him on a formal letter, Levad Chevre Mishnayos Baal Peh Ha'olami, to the committee that overseeing Mishnayos Baal Peh, please tell me which Mishnayos are mine, so I can memorize them, and then when I'll go in the street, I'll also say Mishnayos Baal Peh. And everybody would walk around saying those 2 or 3 Mishnahs that they would get. There would be a goydel, and all the people had registered that they wanted to participate in this miftzah would get their Mishnahs, and for a whole year, you would memorize these Mishnahs, and you would say them again and again and again, whenever you were walking in the street, whenever you were when you were idling, in other words, when your mind and your mouth were free. Hat man gemurmelt Mishnayos Baal Peh. So Tessa the Sheni is about his kashas. And Tessa the Rishon, yes, as man geht in gas, man tracht Mishnayos Tanya, man sitzt in Krom Stor, mit a Chumash, a Tilim, ist das teurer wie in der Zeit, wenn in gas es gewinn lichtig beirrtere. Mit Tanya gehen in gas a lieber der Kanye, mit abhaben Tere, mit was sie gehen in gas. This is today's Ayemim, Tessa der Aleph. When you're walking in the street and you think Mishnayos Tanya, or you sit in a store with a Chumash or a Tilim, now this is more precious than it was in the time when the street was illuminated with the light of Teda. We're not allowed to go in the street with an empty heart. We have to have Teda with which to walk in the street. Now this is one Hayem Yem, but there's a handful of others. There's a bunch of Hayem Yems. This Indian, I wrote Chof Aleph Kislev Tes Sivan Yud Aleph Tevis Chof Ad Sheni Hey Shvat Daled Nissen. All of these dates, I mean, I didn't look them all up, but the Rebbe, this Indian of Mishnayos Baal Peh, the Rebbe put in the Hayom Yom, Kama v'Kama Piyamim, many different times. Okay, they're not all about the same thing. In any case, so, this is one of the mitzvahs that the Rebbe made. And of course, the Rebbe was not mistopic with that. The campaigns that the Rebbe started when he first came here, at the beginning, were Mesibah Shabbos. The very first thing was Mesibah Shabbos. And the kids would come together and Pasha would say brachas. Mesibah Shabbos was a big deal. The kids would come together and say brachas. And then in addition to the Mesibah Shabbos, they made almost immediately what was called Mitvach Shah, the Wednesday hour. The release time program. There was the Yid Konakov, Rav Chaim Tzvi Konakov, Alav Shalom. He was a Tomim, but he lived in America for many years, longer than the Rebbe Rayatz and the Friedrich Rebbe. And he knew that in the public schools they have this allowance, that the children can leave the school and go and learn in a place. And he encouraged the Rebbe Rayatz, he suggested to the Friedrich Rebbe that the boys should do it. And if you look in the book, Merkos, Shalah, the Hecht, gave out a book after Harav Yankel Hecht al passed away. With the early years of the Shalah, you see how incredibly successful that program is. They had volunteers from every one of the boys and girls schools in New York. It was not by any means, a Lubavitch exclusive. All the frum boys and girls participated in the Mitvach Shah, from Teda Vadas, and from the Fedes Yerushalayim, and from RJJ, and from YU. They all participated, and the girls also. They had uptailingen, and they had representation, and they had meetings and discussions, and there was a lot of effort put in to these initiatives by all kinds of Yidden all over New York, and they reached tens of thousands of children. It was a very successful thing. And from those, there's a considerable number who either are frum or have a very strong Jewish identity and so forth. So the Friedrich Rebbe, and of course this was in addition to making Temchet Tmimim, the Rebbe was on all fronts, the Friedrich Rebbe. So in the Friedrich Rebbe Siches, you see descriptions of how America is changing through his efforts. In the beginning he says America is a kerach. It's a deep freeze, a frost. And then a couple of years down he says in the ice you're beginning to see cracks. The ice is beginning to crack. It's getting weak, it's thawing, it's beginning to crack. And then a couple of years after that he says in the cracks of the ice you could see water. There's leads, there's already fresh water running between the cracks of the ice. And then a couple of years after that he says the ice is beginning to move. There's so much fluid, living water, the ice is beginning to move. The Rebbe didn't use these kinds of visualizations, imagery. But the Friedrich Rebbe does, describing the transition from when he first came to what happened over that decade. In Tafshin Zayin, I think, there's a sikha from the Friedrich Rebbe that when I was here the first time, I was asked by the journalist in America what I thought about American Jewry. So the Rebbe says, and I said, American Jewry has a very great future. You know, Yankel Hecht, J.J. Hecht once said, the Rebbe gesagt, Amerikaner Jugend is a gute Tag. But that's a good kneten. He says, American youth are very good dough. It has to be properly kneaded. And then you could make bread. There could be a Michael Adam. And the Rebbe said, I was here 27 years ago. And I was asked what I thought about America. I said, Americans are very sincere, they're good people, and they're very good, they have a great promise for a great future for Yiddishkeit. So the interviewer said to me, but all the other Gedali Yisrael are saying different. All the other Gedali Yisrael are saying that America will never be a Mokum Teda. And the Rebbe says, now it's 27 years later, and you see that I was right and they were wrong. That's what he says. Not 27, 17 years later. Yeah, 17 years later. That I was right and they, wir sind gerecht. We were right. He says how the Rebbe does, approaches it. And one final thought that I want to share, ich koch sich in dem sehr stark, is that in Tovshin Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis, in the early 70s, the Rebbe had a Yechidus. And in the Yechidus, the Rebbe told a member of Anash, a group of Anash, that ich bin sich mishtadel to tun alles wie die Schwer. I try to do everything with the Friedrich Rebbe did it, but there's three things that separate me from the Friedrich Rebbe. And I'm not going to say all three things. I'm just going to say the one that's Negeh Lenidin. And that is that the Rebbe the Schwer gewollt as America soll sein a Mokum Teda. The Friedrich Rebbe's hope was that America would be a place of Teda. Quote, und hat das nicht sicher gewesen zu sehen. The Friedrich Rebbe did not merit to see it. Und ich bin ja sicher das zu sehen, the Rebbe said. Ich bin ja sicher das zu sehen. The Rebbe said in the early 1970s, I see the America that the Friedrich Rebbe envisaged. Which not stam you go to yeshiva and you learn. But kehem chayenu ve'erech yomeinu ve'hem nega yemem v'aloyla. That weißt doch, the Gemara says, it's brought in halacha. Shema Teima, I learned Kol HaTeira Kula. So now, Eilech, and I would learn other Chochmes. So the Chazal say, no, your heart is only in them and not in anything else. This kind of Torah, this kind of Yiddishkeit, which is old-fashioned, which is Viddishtakel, the Alter Heim, that the mind of a Yid is, that all there is Torah, and there's no other inyanim. This was not consistent with America. And the Rebbe said the Friedrich Rebbe was Mesa Nefesh to create this, but I'm zeicha to see it. He wasn't zeicha to see it, Kayachol, and I'm zeicha to see it B'Pel Mamish. I told you this many times that Chaim Dalfin has his book, the Rebbe and the Rav, and in his book he explains how Rabbi Soloveitchik took the approach of modern Orthodox because he Pasha did not believe that it's possible that in America there should be a Yid as Evi HaMalek Tzait. And he just couldn't fathom it. he understood that if Yidden are going to be from, they're going to have to be modern. In other words, he wasn't interested in modern Orthodox because he was interested in modern. He was interested in modern Orthodox because he felt this was the best way to keep Yidden from. And Chaim Dalfin says that until the late 60s, if you looked at the American landscape, you would have said that Soloveitchik was right and that Rebbe was wrong. Because even though there were already yeshivas, but the shita was so compromised, so farvased, it was so diluted by an American hashkafa. And in the beginning of the 70s, it began to change. That the yeshiva bachar understood that you don't have to learn a yeshiva and go to college. And you understand, going to college is not just for a panosa, it's Zayin HaMensch darf man gehen in college. And this is what the Ike Mochama, that the Friedrich Rebbe fought against, was you're a mensch from Teira Semes, not from anything else. And this is the change and revolution that the Rebbe made. And this is our Yerusha. Right? And we scream out Mosai, and for very, very good reasons. But this is what the Rebbeim gave us, and the Rebbeim give us. That America is no different than Lubavitch, and Poltava, and Neville, and Rostov, and Leningrad. It's hard, it's different. It's in many ways different. But the Nekude is the Zelbe. And this is unser Avoida. It's not just a Yerusha, it's an Avoida, it's an obligation. And I talked a little bit longer than I would, but let's learn Tanya, if you don't mind. Let's learn a little bit of Tanya. We're learning Perikid Zayin, chapter 17. And last week, we learned about a half a Perek. Technically, we learned until Chav Gimel Amar Aleph, which would be, I guess, page 45, the line that begins with the word Im Loi Mi. Im Loi Mi. I'm going to guesstimate that it's 9 lines on the top of the page. In other words, we learned almost a half a Perek last week, right? We learned from the beginning of the Perek, Ki korev elach adava me'ed befich bevavcha la'aseisei, eichu korev me'ed, and we learned until Im Loi Mi shu rasha b'yemes. So let me at least review what we learned last week and at least begin the new shtick. We'll see how time goes. The Tanya has 2 basic messages or methods of Beinani. There's the message of Beinani, which we're going to start in Mitzvah Hashem in the next Perek, chapter 18. Perek Yud Ches. In that Perek, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce us to what I call the visualizing Beinani. The Beinani who is a Beinani because of its status, because of his imagination. Not because of his understanding, not because of his seichel, not because of moyach v'lev, not because of intellect and emotion, but because of his ability to imagine, to image, to envisage. What image is he going to imagine, which is going to bring him to the state of Beinani? The answer is Inyan HaMesiras Nefesh. That's what we're going to be discussing in the 8th Prakim, beginning with chapter 18. But until Perek Yud Ches, the Alter Rebbe talks about a Beinani of Moyach, a Beinani of Seichel. I learn about Hashem, I contemplate, I consider, I think about the Eibishter, and my learning and my thinking about the Eibishter brings me into a state of feeling, a state of emotion, which is called Meyach Shalat Alalev V'Toldasei V'Tevi Yitzirasei. The mind rules over the heart from birth and by the nature of one's formation. And of course, the Hemshech HaDavar is Meyach Shalat Alalev V'Toldasei V'Tirasei. And then, of course, Halev Mishalit Alamais Halaguf. The Alter Rebbe says in the last page, in chapter 60, that the guf is Halev is Gashmi, the Moyach is Ruchni. The brain is considered spiritual, however you explain that. But the Lev is considered Gashmi, the heart is considered physical, then it's the Pnimius of the Eivor. It's the inner organ to the remaining organs. But the heart is close enough to the body that when I feel, I act. Right? That when a person feels, they act. Based on their emotions, they live their lives practically. And that's the idea that the Alter Rebbe is trying to present in these 17 Prakim, that if I use my mind to arouse my heart will then direct my body, my life in a good direction, both in Asay Tev, in doing the right thing, as well as in Shomera, not doing Rachman al-Tzan, what's the wrong thing. That's the spirit. That's the spirit of what we learned in all the Prakim leading up to here. But we discovered there's different types of Me'ach Shalta Alev and different degrees of Me'ach Shalta Alev. Some people, the Moyach rules over the heart much more completely, much more comprehensively. Other people, the Moyach Shalta Alev is much more deficient, it's much more limited, it's much more chitainistic, etc., etc., etc. But there's a bottom line. If I use my mind, and my mind moves my heart, even if it's only moving my heart a little bit, but it's moving my heart enough that it affects my action, I'm in the category of Me'ach Shalta Alev. If I use my mind to learn, and then I use my mind to contemplate, to do His boninus, and my Avos Hashem, my Yiras Hashem, my passions may be limited, but there's enough. What we coined in the previous Perek, and we repeated it again last week, Abisala Yiddish Ahaz. We experience a little bit of Jewish heart in our Avodas Hashem, and that Jewish heart translates into a Zehidus, in a particular, and a care, in Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action, both in Sur Meirad, that means not doing Avedis, as well as in Asei Tev, doing the Ratzon Elyon, doing the positive thing, doing the right thing. We're in the station of a Me'ach Shalta Alev Beinin. And the Alter Rebbe uses an expression that, as far as I know, is the only place he uses it in Tanya. That if a person, Yesh Le Moyach B'Katkod, if the Eibishter made you intelligent, if Hashem made you smart, and He gave you the ability to learn, and not everybody has that ability, and He gave you the ability to contemplate, to think, to do His bonanus, so the Alter Rebbe says, Karev Ma'oid V'Nokel. Not only is it near, but it's easy. This is the only time in the entire Sefer Tanya Kadisha you have the word kal. That if you have a mind, if you don't have a mind, it's b'chlal a different story. But if you have the intellect to learn and think, it's kal. It's not only possible, it's not only near, but it's actually easy to use that mind to arouse the so-called bisala Yiddish ahaz, the little emotion that one needs in his heart, that it should affect their kiyum mitzvahs, machshava dibur ma'aseh, soma and asei tev in peil mamish.
What does it practically mean to learn this?
Practically means to learn this bonus is, first of all, you have to learn chassidus. That's the first step. And after you learn chassidus, you have to choose a maimer chassidus that talks to you. And you can have a mashpia, a rav, a madrich to tell you which maimer you should. And then every day before davening, you think it. It could be for a minute, it could be for 10 minutes. Huh? Fine, if that's the Perek you want to think, Perek Mamal, but Perek Mamal, yeah, it's good as boninus, but the Mashpiyim is to give the Baruch as boninus about Achas Hashem, how the Eibush is the Balabas of the world. But fine, there's like Perek Mamal. And every day you think it. The same thing. The purpose for thinking it is that you should feel. So it takes a while to get into it. That's why you have to have so much preparation. If you go... You need to relax your mind. That's the first step, and you need to concentrate. You should know. If you know Hebrew, how to read Hebrew. There's a sefer called Reb Shlomo Chaim. It's a 2-volume set that was made on the Mashpil Reb Shlomo Chaim Kesselman. He passed away this year 50 years ago, in 1971 after Pesach. I think it's fair to say that Reb Shlomo Chaim was the last real mashpia. There were many mashpiyim. There are still mashpiyim. But the Reb Chaim was about Paltiel. He was dedicated to his students till the end of his neshama. And he taught these exercises. So when his biography was written, which is just in the last decade, in the last 10, 15 years, I can't hear you. Yes. In his biography, his students describe what he told them to do. And I think that if a person is serious and sincere about his bonanus, instead of hearing it from me second-hand or third-hand, or I heard it from an Elter Rebbe, heard it from the Melech, who was a Talmud of Reb Shlomo Chaim. You can go to the source. Read Reb Shlomo Chaim. Reb Shlomo Chaim had steps in how you would take 14-year-olds, bar mitzvah boys, and teach them how to think. He had a whole series of steps in how he brought them from point A to point B. And if you're serious about it, I would strongly advise you to read it in the original. One of the things that I was told when I was a teenager is you want to think Chassidus with one condition. Every time your mind wanders, start from the beginning again. So let's say you take the first 15 lines of the Perek Mamalach and you'll sit on them for 41 hours. You don't realize how little concentration you have until you try to concentrate. And your instinct as a person is to get uptight. It's a very big mistake. It's not effective. When you become nervous and uptight, you think you're concentrating better. You're wasting energy, but you're not concentrating better. There's a lashon in the Shemus from Chassidim that one of the greatest tmimim, mamash, one of the greatest tmimim. His name is Rav David Poizner, Rav David Pevzner. He's from Klimovich. The Rebbe Rayatz calls him Hatalmid Muvhak. The only Tomim I saw that lashon Harav Choset Hatomim Hatalmid Muvhak. And what the Frierdiker Rebbe says about Rav David, not Avram Baruch, Avram David. Hatalmid Muvhak, he didn't mean a Talmud Muvhak from Reb Shilin, or a Talmud Muvhak from Reb Hendel, or Talmud Muvhak from... He meant a Talmud Muvhak from the Rebbe Rashab. He was a Moidendika Ovid. He was a Moidendika, he's a big Bamadreg with a great mind. So one of the L'shaydas which you have in the Rishimus of Chassidim is that he complained to the Rebbe about concentration, and the Rebbe Rashab told him, Bazeh HaLoshen, Tracht leicht, which means think softly. Don't think with nerves. Tracht leicht. He was complaining about his concentration. So the Rebbe told him, Tracht leicht, which means you have to, it's a whole avoida to be able to relax and to focus. But a person who goes through these initial steps of relaxing and focusing and thinking, you go,
Called mindfulness. They have courses on it.
whatever it is, but you're not being mindful about chicken soup. You're being mindful about about the Eibishter. So it moves you. So bigger neshamis, it mamish arouses emotions. Smaller neshamis, it moves you in a direction of a positive feeling towards Elokus. This positive feeling is what we were calling in the previous Pedic Abisala Yiddish Hahat. It's not full Avas Hashem and Yiddish Hashem, it's a little Yiddish Hahat. And the Alter Rebbe has a barometer in the Tanya. The barometer that the Alter Rebbe has in Tanya, if you do his bonus, if you do contemplation, and it brings you to Avas Hashem and Yiddish Hashem, which is deficient. It's not whole, it's at the highest level, it's not complete. But if it translates into action, that's a proof that the emotions were good. You understand that if you use this exercise of mindfulness and you're focusing in Elokus, and it creates some kind of a positive feeling towards Hashem, and practically you're careful in Sur Meiran, Asay Tev, and not doing what's wrong and doing what's right in all three levels of thought, speech, and action, that's a raya, that's the proof that the emotions were in a Maimed de Matzav Tev. You understand?
So are you saying that the meditation will help me with Sur Meiran, or you're saying that...
The meditation, we don't like the word meditation, we like the word contemplation. The contemplation helps you feel that your relation with the Eibush has passion, has excitement. That passion, that excitement helps you with the Sur Meiran Asay Tev. If a person has real passion, it's certainly going to help. If a person's passion is deficient, it doesn't necessarily help. But if it helps, that's a proof that the passion was adequate, was good, was enough for that person in that time and that place. So the Alter Rebbe introduces us to this idea of Mayach Shalat Ala Leiv. You're using your mind to arouse your heart, that even though it's a Bisala Yiddish Heart, it's not full of Avas Yiddish. It's a little bit of Avas Hashem and Yiddish Hashem. But because the Avas Hashem is the Yel Lamaisa B'Peil, it's considered enough. And he says about this, Kal Ma'ed L'chol Mi Sheyesh Le'Mayach B'Kad Kadi. If you have intelligence, and you Nakal L'cholad, that's a comment, Karev made with Nakal L'cholad. If you have the intellect, and you have the information, not only is it realistic for a person to do his bonus, which will bring to Avas Hashem and Yiddish Hashem, but it's nakal l'chaladim, it's easy, because if the Eibishter gave you the brain, you have the tools needed to get this done, and you can do it relatively speaking easily. It's a very unusual thing in the Tanya of the Alter Rebbe to use the word easy. Now, in light of this, there's a pasuk, and this was last week's class. What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, "Ki kodev elacha adav miyed beficha ubevavcha la'aseis." And the Alter Rebbe asked two questions. The two questions were that the three levush were not written in order. It doesn't say machshava dibur or maise. It doesn't say maise dibur or machshava. It says dibur machshava maise. Beficha is dibur, bevavcha is thought to be machshava, and la'aseis is maise. The Alter Rebbe asks the question: why are they not in order? To say Either it should say b'machshavtecha, b'libcha, b'ficha la'seise, or la'seise b'ficha b'machshavtecha. What's this business that you interrupt? You say b'ficha first, dibur, then b'lvavcha, which means machshava, and finally mais. So the Alter Rebbe answers the question with another question. And that is, that Beklal doesn't mention thought. It says b'lvavcha, it doesn't say b'machshavtecha. Vavcha means your heart, not your thought. And the second question becomes the basis for the answering of the first question as well as the second question also. And the answer is that we have to reread the pasuk. Stop. You have the mental power to learn and to think about Eibush. Or b'lvavcha, to develop enough feelings in your heart. La seisei, and the word la seisei includes machshava dibur u'maisa. The word la seisei includes and that's what we learned last week. But we read the pasuk. Made beficha. It's near to you the matter atayra shenitn l'cha b'ksav b'alpeh. You could learn it and you could contemplate. Or bilvavcha, they should have just enough heart la'seisa to be able to manage your actions in the inyanim of sermon on seitet. And this is what we learned in the beginning of Perek Yud Zayin last week. Now, let's go weiter. Imloi. We read half a Perek last week, and in this half a Perek, we sort of conclude and summarize everything we learned in the last 16 prakim plus about the idea of a benyani through moyach shalat alavei. And the argument is that if a person uses his moyach to arouse his lave even a little bit, if it's enough to control his levusha, machshava dibur u'maisa, it's good because hayem la'seis and ksiv. In this life, what matters is machshava dibur u'maisa and no more. But now the Alter Rebbe says an exception. This exception is very interesting and it's disturbing, really. We're going to read and translate. Imloi, unless mi shehu rasha b'emes. Unless one is a real rasha, a true rasha. That's what? If a person is a true rasha, this is not going to work. They could learn, they could think, they could feel, but it's not going to work. It says in the Medrash, Rasha is a person who is owned by his heart, and of course the heart means the Yetzer Hara. They do not control their hearts. The Nefesh Elokis does not control their Nefesh Abahamis Klal whatsoever. And for them, this is not enough. The idea that I could learn about the Eibishter and think about the Eibishter and feel the Eibishter, even if my feelings are limited, abyssally in the Shabbos, and then that should be enough to be be'ered my machshava dibur u'maisa in sermon asaytev doesn't work because the Avedis don't let. V'zeh oinesh, let's continue to read. This is a punishment. Al goydel v'oitzam avoinam, the greatness and the intensity of their sin. And the Alter Rebbe says, v'leidivir teira. The Torah is not discussing b'meisim elu, these people that are called apitera dead. Like it says in Chazal, Rishoyim b'chayayim kruyim meis, tzadikim b'misosam kruyim chayim. This person is considered spiritually dead. And dead means cut off. Sheb'chayayim kruyim meis, even though they're alive, they're in spiritual terms meisim. Because the truth is, it's not possible for a person who was a Rosh lahaschir lavid Hashem to begin serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Sor Meiran Asei Teiv, using the technique of the Hizbonus and the Bissel Yiddish Haaretz we described before, B'li sheyasu tshuva al ha'ova tchila, unless they first do tshuva for their past, because if and when they do tshuva for their past, l'shaver ha'klippas, they're shattering the klippas, shei mosach mavdol, they're a screen that separates, u'mechitza shel basla, and a curtain of iron, hamafsekes, which obstructs, which it gets in between, beinam, between a Jew, la'avihem shabashamayim, their father in heaven, al yedei shviras libe, by breaking their heart, umeridas nafshe, and being bitter in their spirit, achatoy, for one's avedet, kameshakostu bezeir, the pasuk says, it says in the Zayah, al pasuk, on the pasuk zichi elikim, this is the karban d'shem elikim. What is the karban d'shem elikim? Ruach nishbara, you break the spirit of klipa, which is leiv nishba, by breaking your heart, v'cholu, v'geim, and it translates, Shayadei leiv nishbar, when a person breaks his heart, nishbar ruach atuma desatachar, he breaks the stranglehold, the hold, the suffocation that the Nefesh HaBahamis has on the person. And the Rebbe says, Ayin Sham Pashas Pinchas Daf Reish Mem Pashas Richid Daf Ches Daf Yamid Aleph or Pir Saramaz Som. I'm going to stop here. The Rebbe says something very, very disturbing and compelling, and I hate to say it, but quite logical. And that is that a Beinani has to be rid of sin, or without sin. Now we had in the earlier program of Eliyahu, a Beinani never sinned. But here we're talking about a Beinani who did sin. And if he did sin, he creates a wall between himself and Elokus. And going forward, it's impossible for this person to be Moyach Shalt Alev, even with his bonus in the bis of the Yiddish Haaretz, unless he does tshuva first. Because tshuva acts as a healer, or as a healing, or as a correction for the Avedas that he did, and resensitizes that person to make it possible for him to be a Beinani. Okay? If he's a Beinani, he's already did tshuva. But if he's a struggling Beinani, and he finds that he's having a very difficult time maintaining the Beinani status, the answer may be that he needs to do tshuva. Because if you don't do tshuva, you have the dilemma of which means someone that I did wrong doesn't go away after I did it. It stays with me. Someone that I did wrong multiple times certainly doesn't go away after it. It certainly stays with me, and it desensitizes me. And tshuva is getting back that resensitization. So I'm going to stop, okay? Let's start with the first word. Rosha be'emes. Who's the Rosha be'emes? So I have a student, was a chassidische younger man. Emes a chassidische younger man. So we were talking. So I don't know how I came to mention that I'm learning a Perikei Zayin. No, how do you teach Rosha be'emes? So that every mashpia has different taich. Some people say Rosha be'emes means Rosha v'rale. The worst. I'm teaching it by Pashtus, and from the Rebbe it's hard to know exactly. Rosha be'emes means a Rosha in Shem HaTayar. A Rosha in the parameters of truth. Not in the borrowed use of Rosha. The borrowed use of Rosha is 51% sin. Rosha be'emes means I'm a Rosha on the level of truth because I did one Aveda for which I haven't done tshuva. That's what Rosha means. That's disturbing in itself. But what's more disturbing, and I shouldn't really say it's disturbing, it's practically disturbing, but in Hashkafa it's not disturbing, it's simply a process. The idea is, I can't engage in holiness and in purity and in cleanliness if I'm dirty. I have to first remove the dirt, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge, maybe it's also, whatever situation we find ourselves in, we want to go to the light. The Rebbe says, not so simple. You want to go to the light, you have to remove the darkness. I think that's disturbing. Maybe it's not disturbing. So I'm going to stop. Huh? Yeah, my aid says, for Allah Shailas, is ein zach. HaPetrona Yachid, Mashiach ben David, Bepel Mamish. Okay, so we're going to stop. I'll do a yem maybe.